Right, so U-869. This is formerly known as Yoo-hoo. This was a Nazi-type XC-40 U-boat which was mistakenly thought to have sunk off Gibraltar. It was actually sunk by the Howard D. Crowe DE-252, which you can see in this picture, and the Coiner DE-331, which you can see in this picture, on February the 11th, 1945, off the coast of New Jersey. So it was discovered by fishermen who had snagged their nets, and a guy called Bill Nagel, who had a dive boat, decided to give it a look, and it turned out to be a U-boat. So U-869 would have likely looked a little bit like this when it was in its final moments. This is just some random shot of a World War II U-boat under sort of a dive bomber sort of threat, depth charging and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately the crew, they all died, and it was getting near the end of 1945, so it was getting near the end really of Hitler's reign, and but this is a typical type XCU boat, and how it sort of how it looks, diesel powered. I think they're they're obviously really slow underwater, like 3 or 4 knots, but I think on the surface they can do sort of 10 knots, something like that. And they were literally just declared war on everybody, and they would bomb all the shipping in the Atlantic and around the British Isles, and they were sort of quite unique bits of war equipment, really. But like anything, it'd be quite relatively easy to sink, really, if you hit it with something. So anyway, this is the dive boat Seeker. I think they launched from Nantucket Island in like the 80s, late 70s, 80s, early 90s, something like that. Had a sort of a 10-year sort of golden sort of dive situation where they were diving on the Andrea Doria, and they were diving on this wreck called the Yoo-hoo, U-869. They didn't discover didn't identify it for years and years because of corrosion and things like that. There was a couple of divers. There was a book by a guy called Bernie Chowdhury, I think, called The Last Dive, which he produced in the year 2000. It was based upon a father and son dive team who dived down to the wreck. They were a little bit inexperienced. They had about 500 dives. They'd been down to the Andrea Doria. However, on this day, they were in really choppy seas, and went for a dive down there to investigate, and they went inside the wreck. I think this was like the mid-90s or very early 90s. Went inside the wreck. I think the young guy. This is actually a picture of the wreck present day. It's very badly corroded. But the two divers, the youngest diver, I think, went inside the wreck and he got stuck. And I think a cabinet fell on him or something. Anyway, his father, who he was diving with, could hear his screams underwater, funny enough, went inside the wreck, rescued him, and their dive plan was to be on the bottom for about 20 minutes. But unfortunately, in the mayhem of all what was going on, the shock of being stuck inside a wreck and trapped and all that sort of stuff, they'd spent 43 minutes. And they'd churned up a lot of sediment and took a long time to find the exit to get out of the U-boat. They managed to get out, but in the panic and the narcosis or the martini effect, they'd been on the bottom too long and were feeling quite drunk, and they weren't thinking properly, and they'd forgotten or they couldn't find their decompression tanks, there's oxygen, the cylinders, what they were going to use to spend 5 hours decompressing to the surface, because this wreck's at about 70 metres, 70, 80 metres, something like that. And Obviously, the wreck has now been opened up quite a bit from the corrosion and stuff like that. This is a 2020 dive, I believe, and yeah, so they ascended by free ascent without any oxygen, which they intended to use, and they ran out of oxygen pretty much going up. So they ended up going up the distance in about 5 minutes or something like that, and even less than that, it's a few minutes. Just raced to the top, and they just gassed up. And in one last selfless act, I think the father handed over his remainder of his oxygen because his son had ripped his breathing apparatus or something. And anyway, I think the father died on the boat, and the son was airlifted to a decompression chamber, and he died later of his injuries. And the Rousers, they were called, and father and son team. And that was back in the days when the technology and the oxygen was sort of sitting right on the fence between using the old existing and the new. And they were, in the end, an analysis was made, and apparently they were lacking a little bit of deep water experience. Had plenty of dives, but deep water experience, and sort of taken on a bit too much. And down a wreck that deep, it can be very, very dark and sediment and just very dangerous, really. Deep water diving is dangerous if it goes wrong. This is a picture of actually inside the Yoo-hoo. This is the officers' quarters where they eat their dinner and stuff like that. I just thought this was quite unique. And I think the torpedo hatch is at the other end. And yeah, so I mean the U-boat, they were up to their usual mischief, so to speak, and the American Navy wouldn't take any kind of aggro at all, and the two warships or destroyers, whatever they're called, and had located it and managed to destroy it, or just wound it enough for it to go to the bottom and fill up with water, and everybody would have perished. Not a very nice way to go, but there you go. What goes around comes around. And yeah, I think one other diver had died on that rig. This is the skipper of that boat, the Seeker, who I think he's just fishing the Andrea Doria there for cod. And it's a beautiful condition, cod. And yeah, he was like one of the pioneers of all the wreck fishing. All the diving on the wrecks back in those days. Okay then, guys, I hope you enjoyed the little video. We sort of touched on it a bit there. And yeah, hope you enjoyed, and please subscribe. More videos along the way. And thank you.